This cover of a music book signaled the beginning of a new era in the year 1900. The illustration shows the Angel of Progress in the center. She is carefully balancing herself on a wheel with wings, which symbolizes time. The angel is flanked by several technological inventions, such as the railways, the camera, and the printing press, besides some machines and a factory. Another popular image that glorified machines was the two magicians printed on a trade magazine about 100 years ago. The past and the present was depicted with Aladdin and a mechanic, signifying that a mechanic of today could create magic like Aladdin. The 20th century glorified machines and industries as the new age superpowers. Was then industrialization all about new machines and factories? Contrary to popular imagination, industrialization did not exactly begin with industries and machines. The early industrialization phase, also known as proto-industrialization, paved the way for modern industrial economies. In the 17th and 18th centuries, several merchants in Europe shifted their production to the countryside. With the growth of world trade and acquisition of new colonies, there was a huge demand for finished goods. Merchants persuaded peasants and artisans to produce for an international market. In the countryside, open fields and common land were fast disappearing, and peasants were desperately looking for alternate sources of income. Therefore, they readily agreed to work for the merchants. Working from the villages gave peasants the flexibility to cultivate their land and earn as well. This association linked the towns and the countryside very closely. For example, in Britain, there were skilled laborers like wood staplers, spinners, weavers, fullers and dyers in the countryside, who were involved in various tasks of cloth production. However, finishing of the cloth took place in London. The proto-industrial times involved a lot of workers who worked from their homes and not in factories. By the 1730s, factories began developing in Britain, but they actually expanded only in the late 18th century. Cotton was the first industry to grow in Britain. The invention of new machines accelerated the pace of production and increased the output. The invention of the cloth mill by Richard Arkwright brought a revolution to cloth production, as it brought together the scattered processes under one single roof. Slowly, new mills and factories dotted the landscape of England in the early 19th century. Iron and steel was the next industry to flourish. With the expansion of the railway network in Britain as well as in the colonies, there was a huge demand for iron and steel. Although the new industries were expanding, they did not completely replace the old industries. Even at the end of the 19th century, most textile production happened through domestic units. New technology such as steam engines did not bring a revolutionary change overnight. Although many small industries had begun to use some technology in their processes, industrialists were still hesitant about the new machines due to their high repair and maintenance cost. For example, the steam engine could enhance the production manifold. However, in the early 19th century, only 321 steam engines were used all over England. Industrialization was in full swing in the late 18th and the 19th century, but the shift to machines was a gradual and slow process. During the 19th century, hordes of people began migrating from the countryside to the industrial centers, such as London, in search of jobs. Since the market was flooded with people, labor was cheap. To have cheap labor was a profitable option for the industrialists, who did not wish to invest money in machines. In industries such as breweries and gasworks, the demand for labor was seasonal. More people were required during winters. Similarly, during Christmas, a lot of people were needed to work as binders and printers. After the peak season, laborers would be out of work again. Rather than installing machines, the owners of seasonal industries preferred to hire manual labor for a short period. Manual work was also favored for products that required intricate design and finish. Machines could be used to mass-produce uniform goods. However, it required craftsmanship and skill to make goods with individual specifications. In Britain, the upper classes preferred handmade goods for their finesse. In America, though, industrialists preferred to work with machines due to a shortage of labor. In Britain, there was no dearth of labor. In fact, easy availability of labor in the market affected the life of the workers. Many people came to the cities in a hope to improve their lives, but had to spend weeks of extreme hardship before they finally got jobs. It was difficult to find shelter in the cities. People had to spend nights under bridges or in poorly maintained night shelters and refuges. There were warehouses also where they could stay after obtaining a ticket, and others went to the casual wards maintained very poorly by the law authorities. However, it wasn't an easy task to get into the warehouses. The warehouses used to conduct a thorough medical examination against diseases. Getting a job was easier if there was some friend or relative working in a factory. Workers had to lead a miserable life on their shoestring wages. During the 19th century, wages increased slightly, but their real value remained low due to the consequent price rise. For the workers, the period of employment was an important factor, as their average daily income was decided by the number of days of work. Till the mid-19th century, nearly 10% of the urban population was very poor. During the economic slump, there was a dramatic rise in the unemployed population in the cities. Another threat was the innovation of new machines which would replace the workers. The spinning jenny, designed by James Hargreaves in 1764, is a classic example. This machine increased the pace of spinning and reduced the demand for labor, thereby leaving hand spinners jobless. The second half of the 19th century witnessed the rise of building activities, which came as a blessing in disguise for the workers. Construction work for railways, road widening, drainage and sewers created new job opportunities. In the next 3 decades, there was a significant increase in the number of workers employed in building activity. Some archaeological excavations in Egyptian tombs have revealed numerous fragments of cotton originating from Gujarat and dating back to the 5th century AD. Similarly, items like bone needles and wooden spindles have been unearthed at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which indicates the use of homespun cotton even in those early times. Historically, India has been known the world over for its flowing silks and crisp cottons. Textiles were one of the most vital industries of India. Let's understand how the arrival of the British and industrialization impacted this age-old industry. India had a huge international market for its textiles. The old seaports of Surat, Masulipatam and Hooghly also enhanced the textile trade and connected India with the Gulf ports in the Red Sea and that of Southeast Asia. Indian merchants and bankers played a key role in this network of export trade. With the rise of European companies, this trade network suffered a gradual decline. The European companies obtained several concessions from local courts and secured monopoly rights to trade. Consequently, the old Indian ports began to shrink. On the other hand, Bombay and Calcutta emerged as the new ports catering to the European companies. Before consolidating its political power, the East India Company had found it difficult to regularly export Indian textile goods at cheaper rates. The textile market in India was very competitive with a variety of foreign and local traders. As a result, a weaver and a supply merchant could negotiate the best price for the goods. After establishing its power, the East India Company developed a system of management and control. This system helped the company eradicate competition, control costs, and ensure regular supply of textile goods. The company also appointed a paid servant called the Gomasta, who supervised the weavers, collected their produce, and examined the quality of cloth. This step did away with the brokers in the cloth trade, but caused a lot of chaos in the lives of the weavers. The Gomastas were the sole buyers of the weavers' produce. Besides this, the prices paid to the weavers were really low. In wake of this exploitation, some weavers rebelled and some migrated to other villages, while a few of them even gave up weaving and became agricultural laborers. However, it didn't end here. The start of the 19th century came with a fresh set of challenges for the weavers. As the cotton industry developed in Britain, industrialists forced the government to impose import duties on goods from other countries, so that the British Manchester goods would face no competition from outside. They also wanted the East India Company to sell the British goods in the Indian market. This led to the market getting flooded with Manchester imports. This made the situation worse for the weavers, as their export market collapsed. Furthermore, with the US Civil War, the cotton supplies to Britain drastically decreased, and so Britain turned to India for support. This led to a sudden surge in raw cotton exports, resulting in soaring cotton prices. Gradually, towards the end of the 19th century, India saw the growth of factories and the fine art of weaving died a slow death. These are pictures of the people who pioneered the growth of industries in India. Cbse Nasirwanji Tata was famous for the Tata Group of Industries, and Dwaraknath Tagore was one of the first Indian businessmen who invested in shipping, shipbuilding, mining, and banking and insurance. Let's understand the nature of the trade and industries of these great industrialists. During the British era, the major export item from India was opium. It was exported to China, and in return, the British got tea from China. Undoubtedly, China became the focal point of British trade. Indians got involved in this trade as they began to provide finance, procure supplies, and ship consignments. After making money from the China trade, some Indians decided to set up their own industries. In Bengal, Dwaraknath Tagore invested his money to set up 6 joint stock companies in the 1830s and 40s, but they did not flourish. However, several other traders followed his example and set up successful business empires. People like Cbse Nasirwanji Tata and Dinshopati established industries in Bombay, while Seth Hukum Chand set up the first jute mill in Calcutta. At this time, some Indian merchants had trade links with Burma, the Middle East and East Africa as well. And a few Indian commercial groups catered to the domestic market. They provided finance and other services to traders within India. Later on, they invested their money in setting up factories. However, not all was well for the Indian merchants. The stringent policies of the British government restricted their trade. Their exports were limited to items like cotton, opium, wheat and indigo, which were required by the British. Moreover, European managing agencies were given the task of controlling Indian industries. These agencies rendered Indian industrialists helpless and had complete control over their investments and key business decisions. Despite all odds, Indian factories multiplied in the second half of the 19th century. The first cotton mill was established in Bombay in 1854. A few years later, the first jute mill sprung up in Bengal. Gradually, many cotton spinning and weaving mills came up. A strong labor force was required in these mills, which opened new avenues of employment. In 1901, nearly 5,84,000 people worked as laborers. These laborers were peasants and artisans who had moved to nearby cities in search of work. As the number of job aspirants increased, mill owners began to hire a jobber who helped manage recruitments. Jobbers were typically old, experienced and trusted workers. In spite of the colonial restrictions, Indian industries continued to grow and provided employment to thousands of people. This is not a painting of baby Krishna, but an advertisement of 1928 by the Woodward's Gripewater Company. In the last phase of the 19th century, Indian markets were flooded by goods from Britain. To create a positive image of their product and boost sales, British manufacturers used effective advertisements. The owners of Manchester goods tried to create a unique brand identity for themselves by marking a label, "Made in Manchester," on all their clothes. Early Manchester labels showed many Indian gods and goddesses to create respect and approval for the product. Images of deities were used to make Indian buyers identify with these foreign products. Calendars were also printed to advertise products. These calendars could be used by the rich and the poor, the educated and the illiterate alike. Some calendars also carried the images of Nawabs and kings, which in a way guaranteed the buyer about the product's good quality. On the other hand, the advertisements by Indian manufacturers were very nationalistic, upholding the idea of Swadeshi. Since the Manchester goods commanded a good market share, Indian industries avoided competing with them in the beginning. Indian companies started producing coarse cotton yarn, which was not a British import to India. This yarn was either used by handloom weavers or was exported to China. With the beginning of the Swadeshi movement in the 20th century, industrial groups became vocal in their demands. They got together and pressurized the government to increase tariff protection and grant them other concessions. From 1906, the export of Indian yarn to China declined because of new players in the Chinese market. Therefore, Indian industrialists began cloth production. The beginning of the First World War brought a dramatic turn to industrialization in India. The supply of Manchester goods declined as English mills got busy in producing goods for the war. This provided a golden opportunity to the Indian mill owners to capture the domestic market. Later on, Indian industries were also used to supply items for the British Army in the war. Due to this sudden surge in demand, several new factories were set up in India, and many people were employed. After the war, the British economy could not compete with the new players. The US, Japan, and Germany, and collapsed. Manchester could not regain its position in the Indian market either. While factories grew after the war, large industries were limited to big centers like Bengal and Bombay. Interestingly, most labor force still worked out of small household units in the villages. Despite the initial setback from the Manchester goods, the production of handloom cloth increased in the 20th century. Many weavers shifted to the technologically advanced looms with fly shuttles. By 1941, over 35% weavers used this technology. Specialized weavers who wove finer varieties for the rich people were in a better position to handle competition from the mills. Their production was not impacted by bad harvests and famines, as the rich could afford to buy at all times. Moreover, mills could never replicate the exquisitely woven fabric. The weavers lived a poor life and learned to survive the cutthroat competition. Overall, hand labor and small-scale production remained integral to the process of industrialization.